Hello again, this is Bentguru bringing you yet another tutorial on rushing, or more accurately, defending against it. This is a World Cup match between myself and Tschorchiboy. This was round 5, I believe, on Blitz. And just to give you some background here, I was expecting a helicopter rush from Tschorchiboy. I had researched him, as I do all my opponents, and his last game had his opponent, whom he beat, said lol helicopter rush, and the game lasted like 4 minutes, so I assumed he went all in helicopter, and that is sort of what I was expecting here, which is not actually what ended up happening. He ended up doing this: an extremely heavy ground rush of APCs with some Martyr 1s to back them up, and I believe there are some Weasels in them as well. So I had seen another of his replays where this had occurred, so I knew that he had this in his repertoire, but I was not really expecting it for this match, and I was playing fairly conservatively. As you'll see if you've watched my anti-heli-rush tutorials, this is essentially the same force as was there for my part. I have my core build here, my Weasels and my VTS 1s with Recon. I also have my Martyr Rollins, my 2nd Command, my CPC, Gazelle, and I put some other units on the lip here to contest Charlie. So, again, this is a real game, not a stress test, and this is a 1v1, which I think is the first for this. So, we're going to start from my perspective so I can talk you through my decision making here. So immediately off the bat, I do my usual. Infantry goes forward, the Gazelle helicopter lifts off, and the rest of my force, as always, is going to stay compacted, and it's going to move in the same direction. I'm not sending singleton units out to Echo and Charlie because there's no point. Now, important to note here that I see my opponent has immediately abandoned Delta, and that shoots my suspicion way, way up, because people who play the long game, they won't usually abandon their starting points. That's indicative almost always of a single command unit build, which in turn almost always means some sort of a rush, be it helicopter or ground. Now, I push my heli recon far forward here, and I'm not seeing any helicopters, so now I'm thinking I'm being flanked by helicopters, but I see the armored column coming over Alpha. And now I know what I am facing. I know what I'm facing a long, long time before it hits anything important. And moreover, because I've seen this before, I have a decent idea of what he's going to do. This is not enough for everything to be there. And in fact, if it was, that'd be awesome, because everything would be completely out of place. But most people who do this build will split their units up into halves. It's a fairly consistent behavior. Even helicopter rushers do this. And so I immediately suspect that Hotel is going to be hit. I leave a sacrificial recon up there, and I start moving everything back to defend against this rush, because I want to collapse my forces. And in fact, I do see the second half of the rush there. I leave my Sultan here waiting a bit too long, and I leave the Rollins here a bit too long. But at this point, the Rollins are not particularly helpful, because I'm not going to be facing any anti-air. You can see my response to the rush here. I call out heavy hogs. In retrospect, I don't think this was a very good idea. I do love my heavy hogs, but simply put, they don't have enough rockets to reasonably deal with a force like this. So Sultan starts running away, and the rest of my forces prepare to ambush this column of units here. Now, keep in mind, my strategy here is not to defend Foxtrot, for the simple purpose that I don't think I actually can defend Foxtrot and win. My goal is to cause as much damage to the enemy as possible, because, and if you've seen my other replays, you'll remember this, the longer a rush goes on, the less potent it becomes. So my goal here is not to win. My goal here is to survive, do as much damage as possible, and prolong the rush. So, my forces here, they're not letting the enemy close in, and they're moving off to protect this Sultan, because I think the CPC is probably dead. The rest of these units are here to cause as much damage as humanly possible before going down to this mass infantry fire. And while this may look chaotic, it's actually not all that bad. I'm ahead in points, and more importantly, almost all of those points are going to be the TPZ Fuchs that I've taken out. These Martyrs try and go for the Sultan, but because I kept the rest of my forces with it, they get intercepted. And they do get a few shots off here before I duck behind the building and break line of sight. If I get incredibly unlucky here, maybe my Sultan dies, but usually it doesn't. And I see the second half of Martyrs here, and I intercept those as well. Back to this, again, my plan is to string this out as long as possible. My second plan is to take out these TPZ Fuchs, because they're the legs of this rush. Without the TPZ Fuchs, these infantry are going to be pretty much worthless, because they can't get anywhere very fast on their own, and everything I have can outrun them. I'm keeping my autocannons back. I'm laying down infantry, or I lay down infantry in the face of this to just do as much damage as possible. And I am making a good faith effort to run away with my CPC here. But honestly, I'm not completely, you know, if I lose the CPC, it's by no means the end of the game. I've secured Charlie. I've defended my Sultan. I've taken out the mobile Martyr forces here. And I'm actually getting a lot of income, compared to my opponent who is getting no income. So this is phase 1 of a rush defense. Absorb the initial attack, prolong it, and most importantly, do not lose the game in the first 5 minutes of contact. And he does eventually catch up to the CPC here. I try and make a run to Echo, but it's not going to work. But we'll switch back to neutral here, and you can see he's unloaded all of his infantry. He does have weasels here, but they're out of fuel. And the CPC is going to go down to a lone Martyr 1 who has survived here. But again, that, in this situation, that's acceptable losses. I essentially did 684 points worth of damage to Fuchs. I don't think I actually killed a whole lot of infantry in that attack. Well, I killed the Martyrs. So 684 points of damage to Martyrs and Fuchs. So he's only got like 15 or so Fuchs left, and the majority of my forces are actually still alive, and they're encamped around in Charlie to soak up this counter-assault. And that is what eventually what happens. Tschorchiboy's in a little bit of a bind here, actually. None of his Fuchs have infantry in them, which sort of decreases their lethality a lot. But on the flip side, it's going to take him a long time to put infantry back in those Fuchs. He's still going to be hitting the majority of my forces in the middle. If he had, I'm not sure he would have won. But more importantly, the longer he waits, you know, the more opportunity that I have to go off and defend somewhere else, or move to Echo, or not Echo, Golf, and call in some reinforcements. What I'm essentially waiting on here is enough points to call in a second command unit. And again, we'll switch to mine. I identify that the rush is coming. My Martyrs are taking out Singleton Fuchs as they come. The rest of my AACs are encamped in the forest here, and we see this column of Fuchs. And I decide now is time to break, to run for it with my Sultan, and let the Fuchs run the gauntlet. Now, I do make what is a fairly gigantic strategic mistake here. I send the Sultan away with no escorting units. In particular, I send it away with no roll-ins, which I definitely should have done. Sending it away without air ever is pretty unconscionable in this situation, because my opponent has retaken Delta, and all it would take is a single Gazelle to really kill me. And as you can see, these Fuchs, even if they had infantry in them, I don't think they really would have won this fight. I've got too many Martyrs, I've got paratroopers in the woods, and it just wouldn't have worked. And obviously, none of the Fuchs are going to make it past my blockade of the road here. And I'm once again ahead by a couple hundred points. This is actually the bit of the map, bit of the game where it gets scary here. Why is it lagging again? Okay. I see the Gazelle cannon come in. This is why you send roll-ins with your command unit. And you can see I stop here and go a little bit, oh shit. But I decide that the best move of my admittedly horrible set of moves here is to keep charging forward, get into Gulf, secure it, and call in a second command. Because I don't expect this guy to last. I break line of sight coming down the hill, get in there, and now it's just really a praying game. And hilariously enough, my Sultan decides that, you know, he's gonna fight back here. And he nearly takes out the Gazelle cannon by itself. But nope, Sultan dies. But unfortunately for Tschorchiboy, literally 5 seconds ago, this came onto the map. So, I've essentially won at this point. Keep in mind, I've lost 2 command vehicles, but we're still even in points, and the rest of my force is still in one piece. Second Gazelle cannon comes out, trying to figure out what the hell just happened. It gets shot down, and the game is essentially over at this point. The infantry Zerg is still on the map, but it's not really dangerous because it's so slow. And I decide just to keep my units here to thin out the herd, so to speak. And I actually do end up killing a lot of units this way. This is a final desperation push from Tschorchiboy to get in close with my command unit, but it runs into all my martyrs and it just goes nowhere. So this is a pretty textbook example of how you want to defeat an APC rush. Again, the principles of beating the rush stay the same. Objective number 1 is to survive the first 5 minutes and prolong the game. The longer the game goes on, the better chances you are of winning. Second objective is to do as much damage as humanly possible. And in particular with APC rushes, to take out the APCs, because the infantry by themselves are actually not that scary. It's the fact that these fast APCs can close with your units and hot drop infantry on them, who will then use their AT rockets and blow everything you have up. So you want to keep the range open, cause as much attrition as possible, and most importantly, protect your command vehicles. You can lose one for the sake of defanging the majority of your opponent's firepower, but you've got to make sure you don't lose the second one like I did, because that gets scary very quickly. And I really was a few seconds away from losing this match. And we'll just go through the rest of it. I move along flank here where Tschorchiboy, he really can't do anything to win. His infantry, most of them are actually out of bullets to start out with, but they can't really do anything. So they sit here in Charlie. Any push over toward me in Gulf is just going to get annihilated by VDS-1s. And I think he realizes at this point there's very little hope, because he buys an off-1. And he starts randomly firing over here and trying to one-hit my command vehicle. And he actually manages to blind hit a mutt, which is, you know, fucking ridiculous. Am I allowed to say that on YouTube? I guess I'll have to put up a disclaimer now. But flank goes in, and Tschorchiboy's undefended command vehicle is destroyed. And that is it. I win 2154 to 1315. So, don't make the mistake of thinking that this was a particularly close game based on how close I came to losing. It wasn't. The ground rush was completely under control because I stuck to my guns, I didn't let him deal a killing blow, and I kept my main force of units alive, whereas I dealt a lot of damage to his. If he had put his infantry back in his APCs around center, he might have done a bit more damage to my main force of units. He might have taken out some martyrs, he might have taken out some weasels, but he still would have lost that firefight, because at most he had maybe the capability to move 17 squads of infantry. it's not actually a terrible much. That's below the critical level you need to really do some damage. And keep in mind, those would have been, you know, had their APC shut out from under them, so most of them are going to be panicked anyway. My only real mistake in this was not sending AA to cover the command vehicle, and that had absolutely nothing to do with the rush. That was just a, you know, mind fart from me. So, hopefully everybody has learned something today, and as always, hopefully there will also be less hysteria on the forums.